Hi, sixth grade. This is Mrs. Conant, and we are getting started again on our videos. Today we're going to be talking about fractions and percents. Before we get started, just make sure that you have your math journal and a pencil and you're taking notes. We're going to start right away with a definition that I want you to write down, and that is a definition for percent. So a percent is a ratio in which a quantity is compared to 100. Or another way that you can think about it, you can say it out of 100. So how many or how much out of 100? 100 is our key number that we need to remember when we're talking about percents. So this is an example of a word problem that has percents in it, and it's just to show you that we use percents all the time in everyday life. I use it all the time when I'm grading your papers. Anytime you walk into a store and something's on sale, you'll see percent off. Percents are everywhere, and so it really is a life skill to learn about percents. So let's take a look at this word problem. This word problem says, Brenda and Jessica went shopping. They both purchased items on sale for 50% off the regular price. Brenda spent $10 for an item with a regular price of $20. Jessica spent $25 for an item with a regular price of $50. So what this word problem is showing us is that both Brenda and Jessica received a discount of 50% off the regular price. Now 50 is half of 100. Now remember, 100 is our key number when we're talking about percent. And so because 50 is half of 100, that means that Brenda and Jessica both got half off their regular price. So for Brenda, the regular price of her item was $20, so she got half off of that, so that made it $10. And Jessica, the regular price was $50, and she got it half off, and so she spent only $25. Let's talk about writing a percent as a fraction. So here is a percent. This is 45%. Now remember, we said that 100 is the key number we're going to be thinking about when we think about percent. And percent is also, another way you can think about it is you can think of out of 100. So when we see 45%, we actually can write that as a fraction, and we can write it as 45 out of 100. Okay, we have a total of 100, that's our denominator on the bottom, and out of that 100, we are choosing 45. So 45% can be written as 45 over 100. Now remember, we always want to reduce our fractions down to their lowest terms. And so is 45 out of 100, is that written in its lowest terms? No, it's not. And so we need to reduce this fraction. So we need to think about what is a factor that we could divide into both of these. We need to think about the greatest common factor that these two numbers have. And for 45 and 100, the greatest common factor is 5. So we would divide 5 into both the denominator of 100 and the numerator of 45. And when we do that division, we would get 9 over 20. So 45 over 100 has been reduced down to 9 over 20. Okay, so we started out with our percent of 45%. Then we turned that percent into a fraction of 45 over 100. And then we found the greatest common factor between 45 and 100, and that was 5. We divided 5 into both the numerator and the denominator, and that gave us our fraction written in lowest terms, which is 9 over 20. Now we're going to try this with the number 70. So I'd like for you to take a minute. You can pause the video, and I want you to go through each one of those steps with 70%. I want you to first turn it into a fraction, and then I want you to make sure that that fraction is reduced into lowest terms. Good job. Okay, so remember, we're talking about out of 100. So when we see 70%, we can write it in form as 70 over 100. So then we are going to find the greatest common factor to divide into both 70 and 100, because 70 over 100 is not in its lowest terms. And the greatest common factor of 70 over 100 is 10. So we're going to divide 10 into 70 and 10 into 100, and 70% written in its lowest term fraction is 7 over 10. Let's practice a couple more times. Go ahead and pause the video, and I want you to go through those steps again with 68% and with 60%. Good job. Okay, let's go ahead and do 68%. So first you should have written it as 68 over 100, and then 60% you should have written as 60 over 100, and then you're going to reduce those down, and 68 over 100 becomes 17 over 25, and 60 over 100 becomes 3 over 5. Okay, you should have divided 68 over 100 by 4, and 60 over 100 you should have divided by 20. Okay, last one before we move on to the next section. So 47%, we are going to go ahead and write that in its fraction form, which would be 47 over 100. Now, what I just want to point out here is something very simple. There is no greatest common factor between 47 and 100. The only common factor that 47 and 100 have is the factor of 1. And so 47 over 100 is written in its lowest form. So you go no further with this percent. Okay, now that we learned how to write a percent as a fraction, we're now going to learn how to write a fraction as a percent. So here we have a fraction of 3/5. And we show that 3/5 is equal to something over 100. Now the reason why we have it written this way is because, remember, when we're talking about percent, we're talking about out of 100. So the first thing that we're going to do is we're going to figure out how we can rename 3/5 to be a fraction that has 100 as the denominator, because we want to have a fraction where we can say something out of 100, and then we can turn that into a percent. So we need to think about what was 5 multiplied by in order to get to 100? Well, 5 was multiplied by 20. So 5 times 20 gave us 100. Now whatever we do to the bottom of the fraction, whatever we do to the denominator, we need to do to the numerator. So since we times 5 by 20 and got 100, we now need to multiply 3 by 20 and we'll get 60. So now we can take our fraction. Now it's written in the perfect form in order to write a percent. And so we can say that 60 over 100 equals 60%. Okay, now I would like for you guys to do that with 9 over 10. So I'm going to remind you what you need to do is you need to rewrite 9/10 as a fraction that has 100 as the denominator. And that's our first step in order to turn this into percent. So go ahead and pause this and give it a try. Good job. Okay, so very easily you should know that in order to turn 10 into 100, we need to multiply it by 10. And so 10 times 10, and then we have to do the same to the top, so we're going to do 9 times 10. That gives us 90 over 100. And 90 over 100, written as a percent, is 90%. So these two numbers are two examples of another type of fraction that you can rename as a percent. These are decimal fractions. Now they're not in common fraction form, they're in decimal fraction form. But we can still take these two decimal fractions and turn them into percents. It's actually really easy. What you do is you take a look at the decimal place value. So for the first number, we look at that number and we read it as 23 hundredths. And so remember, our key word for percent is 100 out of 100. So since we can read this decimal fraction as 23 hundredths, that means we can write it as 23 over 100. Now, when we have 23 over 100, that means we can then write it as a percent of 23%. Now let's look at the second one. The second one we can read as 6 hundredths. So that means we can write that in common fraction form as 6 over 100. And that means that we can write it in percent form as 6%. Now I want you to give this a try with 0.57. Go ahead and pause the video. Good job. Okay, so we should know by now that we just go ahead and look at our decimal place value first, and we would read this number as 57 hundredths. And you can go through the step of writing out the common fraction, or if you want, you can now do the mental math, and you would know that 57 hundredths can also be written as 57%. Now it's easy to rename a fraction as a percent when the denominator is 100. That makes it really simple to do, and that's what we've been practicing. But what about when you have a fraction like this and you're asked to write it as a percent? Well, renaming this common fraction as a decimal is the most common strategy used to find percent when you don't already know when you don't already have a fraction that has a denominator of 100. So how do we turn a common fraction into a decimal? Well, it's something we've already been practicing. Remember, it's when you divide the numerator by the denominator. So in this case, we would divide 5 by 6. So we would obviously not be able to divide 6 into 5, so we need to add our decimal point. We need to add some zeros, and then we would do our division. Now, you can look through the steps that we did here, and you'll see that we kept having a remainder of 2 and had to bring down a 0 and another 0. And so we could have had 0.833333. It could have kept going and going. But for the sake of working with percents, remember, we're wanting to just get to that magic number of 100. So we want to round this number to the greatest hundredths place. So we went only as far as our thousandths place because we are going to round. So we're going to look at the number that's in our hundredths place, which in this case is it's the first 3. We're going to look to the number to the right, which is another 3. And we're going to determine that that number in the hundredths place is going to stay the same. So this decimal can be rewritten as just 0.83 or 83 hundredths. And so now that you hear me say 83 hundredths, you should know that 83 hundredths can be rewritten as a percent of 83%. So we can say that 5/6 is equal to 83%. So before we wrap up and you start your practice problems, we're going to just do a quick review. And so I want you to take a look at these two common fractions, and we need to turn these two common fractions into percents. Well, what I want to point out about these two, and this is where you should always start, is first start by taking a look at the denominators. And if the denominators are multiples of 100, so you can divide them evenly into 100, then the easiest thing for you to do is to rename these fractions as a fraction that has 100 as the denominator. Remember, that magic 100, that is going to be the easiest way for us to find the percent. So in this case, we would take a look, if we're going to look at 3 over 25, we would ask ourselves, what times 25 is going to give us 100? And in this case, we multiply 25 by 4. That would give us 100. Well, whatever we do to the denominator, we need to do the numerator. So since we multiply 25 by 4, we're going to multiply 3 by 4, and we get 12. So now we have 3/25 rewritten as 12 over 100. And 12 over 100 can be rewritten as a percent, and that is 12%. Okay, 7 over 10, we are going to do the same thing. Very quickly, we should know that we can multiply 10 by 10 in order to get 100. So that means we're going to multiply 7 by 10 to get 70. And 70 over 100 equals 70%. So whenever you are working on your assignment and you are asked to turn a common fraction into a percent, the first thing I would do is take a look at the denominator. And if it is a multiple of 100, then I would use this strategy of renaming it into a fraction that has a denominator of 100. That's going to be a really easy way for you to find the percent. Now, what about these two common fractions? Now, we can't use the same strategy that we did in the last slide because 7 and 9 are not multiples of 100. We cannot divide either of these numbers evenly into 100. So we're going to need to go about finding the percents that equal 3/7 and 8/9 a little differently. For these two, we're going to have to turn them first into decimals. And remember, we just did that, and the way that we do that is we we divide the numerator by the denominator. So for this first one, we're going to divide 3 by 7. And when we do that, we get a decimal of 0.43, or in other words, 43 hundredths. Now remember, when you hear that hundredths, that's the clue that you can write that decimal as a percent of 43%. Okay, with 8/9, same thing. Go ahead and pause the video, and why don't you practice that? Practice turning that into a decimal and then into a percent. Good job. So with 8/9, you should have up with a decimal of 0.89 or 89 hundredths, and 89 hundredths equals 89%. Now, just to wrap up, I want to show you a couple of quick pictures. Okay, this circle right here, this graph, it shows you different percents that all totaled up equal 100. And again, I'm showing you this just to remind you that when we're talking about percents, we are talking about out of 100. So this graph in particular is talking about favorite color. So we can see that 50 out of 100, like blue, 25 out of 100, like red, 20 out of 100 like green, and 5 out of 100 like yellow. Same thing with this one. We can see that this graph is measuring favorite subjects, and so 25% or 25 out of 100 like math, 25% like science, 20% like history, and 30% like language arts. But if you add all of those percentages up, they will equal 100%. Okay, so your assignment for tonight, besides your video notes, is on page 90 in your workbook. I'd like you to do practice problems 1, 7, and 19. Have a great night. We'll see you tomorrow.